the Bracebridge Emergency Department data. So this data is used to determine how many visits we get, those that get admitted, and the estimated bed needs. So this is the data that's used to determine, uh, what part of the planning process.
Yeah, that's right. So what this said back in 2019, it counted the number of patients who at the Bracebridge site who were admitted through the ED, and it categorized them into their total length of stay once they were admitted. Right. So the first row says that people who were admitted through the ED and stayed between 0 and 1 day, there's 403 of them. That's 403 days, right? They only stayed 1 day, so they can't have any more days. And if we turn that into beds needed to look after that population, it's 1.5 beds. And that's assuming that 90% average occupancy. I'll just give the example at the bottom of the table. So people who come in through the ED and spend 6 days in hospital before they're discharged, there was 116 of those people. They had 696 total days, and that turned into beds as 2.1 beds. So if we sum all that up, we get to 13 beds, right at the bottom of the table, 12.9 beds. So what this says is that the Bracebridge site would have needed 13 beds to look after everybody who came to the ED and was admitted, and their length of stay was 6 days or less. That was our first model. So remember you said we started with 18 beds? Well, it was based on this estimate of saying, well, anybody who stayed 6 days or less could stay in Bracebridge the whole time, wouldn't experience anything different. If it only had 13 beds, we would take people who stayed on 7 days and transfer them to Huntsville. And that they would get their care there. The one thing just to say about this is it's not as though what would happen in real practice is if somebody is in Bracebridge on their 6th day and expect to go home on their 7th day, they would not be transferred, right? They would not be transferred up for 1 day and then discharged from there. You'd have people who are there 4 days and this patient is going to be here for 10 days. They'd be better off with a broader set of services like reactivation, rehabilitation, and so forth, potentially in the ICU care. So they'll transfer on 4 days, but on average, what would happen is everybody with a 6-day length of stay or less could be looked after at the Bracebridge site, which means essentially that that's the vast majority of patients, right? So that's 75% of people who get admitted could have been looked after at Bracebridge with just 13 beds. So 70% of people wouldn't have noticed a difference in their care. But we've increased it since then, as we spoke about before, to now not just 13 beds, but to 36 beds.
Right. So we should have more than enough in that scenario. And I think it's important that we do acknowledge that piece around, the 13 beds would be for those who stayed, 6 days and below. But that also, if you are going to stay 7 or 8 days, and then you're going to be discharged. We're not, the plan is not to transfer that patient up to Huntsville who, maybe just needs a couple more days. The purpose of the transfer to Huntsville is really so that the people can get reactivation and rehabilitation services and then get home faster. And right now, as I mentioned earlier, we transfer those folks out of region. So with this plan, that will support folks getting home faster.